Excellent. A few other things to note is as the presentation is going, please be sure to add any questions that you have in the chat. We do have time for Q&A at the end, and we would love to get to as many questions as we can there. So if you have any burning questions, please be sure to put them in the chat, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. Similarly, you will hear about a number of resources and tools that you can use to take action in electrifying schools. And so just be aware that we will send those out in a follow-up email following this event. So, don't fear, we're definitely going to get them to you. You might see them coming through the chat, but we're also going to send them out following the event. So again, thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you. And with that, I want to pass it over to my colleague, Cora. Take it away.
Hi, I just want to echo Logan's thanks. We're really excited about this event. Thank you for being here. My name is Cora Weisbord. I'm one of the facilitators of the Massachusetts Building Electrification Accelerator, and also a volunteer with Mothers Out Front. So we have amazing speakers today and a lot to learn in an hour. First, we're going to hear from Sarah Ross, a co-founder of Undaunted K-12, on making the case for all electric schools and leveraging new federal and local incentives supporting school electrification. Next, Pip Lewis, a principal with HMFH Architects, will discuss designing Boston's new Josiah Quincy Upper School. Talia Fox, the sustainability manager with the town of Arlington, will tell us about Arlington's air quality and electrification master plan. And finally, we'll share some resources and actions before moving into our Q&A. Next slide, please. So to get us started, we're going to hear from Sarah Ross. Sarah is a co-founder of Undaunted K-12. Undaunted K-12 is a nonprofit focused on supporting America's public schools to make an equitable transition to zero carbon while preparing youth to build sustainable futures in a rapidly changing climate. Sarah is an experienced clean energy executive. Prior to Undaunted, Sarah founded SunGage Financial, a residential solar finance company that makes rooftop solar available to more homeowners. Sarah lives in an all-electric net zero retrofit in Amherst and loves that her teenager is learning to drive an electric vehicle. Sarah, thank you for joining us and for kicking us off today. I will let you take it from here.
There we go. Thanks for unmuting me. So nice to be with you all today. Logan, you can move on to the next slide. As Cora mentioned, we are part of a nonprofit, Undaunted K-12, that's focused on helping states really connect the dots between their climate aspirations, their climate ambition, and the role that they play in school infrastructure. This is a very exciting moment for school infrastructure, so we're excited to talk to you all about how we can leverage that new funding in our schools in Massachusetts. Logan, you can move on to the next slide and then keep going from there. So if we want to electrify our schools, I'm going to make the case that we need to focus on HVAC systems. Why is that? Why do we need to focus on HVAC systems? So it turns out HVAC systems are actually the largest user of energy in our school buildings. Over on the left, you're seeing heating, cooling, and ventilation, the three components that really make up an HVAC system, taking up well over half of the energy that a school uses. So they are kind of the big user of energy. Then on the right, you see, of that heating energy usage, the vast majority of our heating systems in Massachusetts rely on fossil fuels, gas, oil, a little bit of dual fuel in there. In fact, this is as of the last inventory in 2016. We should have a newer one, but this is the best we have right now. Almost 98% of our HVAC systems in the state, in schools, burn fossil fuels. So big energy users, highly reliant on fossil fuels. You can go to the next slide. So next, I'm going to make the statement, the contention that switching to heat pumps is the single most impactful action we can actually take in our school buildings to contend with climate change. Why is that the case? So let's step back and just make sure everyone knows what a heat pump is. Heat pumps are a magical piece of mechanical systems that actually do a smart thing and move heat rather than burning fossil fuels to make heat. This eliminates all the on-site combustion that would normally be associated with an HVAC system. This improves indoor and outdoor air quality. Heat pumps are also highly efficient, whereas a brand new top-of-the-line gas boiler is only going to get to 98% efficient. Heat pumps can get, and particularly ground source heat pumps, can get to from 300 to 600% efficient. That means for every 1 unit of energy we're putting in to run this piece of mechanical systems, we're getting 3 to 6 units of heat out of that. And again, that magic happens because we're moving heat rather than burning things to make heat. The last thing to know about heat pump is that it offers both heating and cooling. This is really important for our school buildings. Can move on to the next slide. So part of the reason why we need to focus on HVAC systems is because they're not up to the job right now in our schools. You know, we've certainly experienced through COVID the challenges of out-of-date HVAC systems. But as we look forward, what schools are contending with more and more is extreme heat, and the fact that our schools in the Northeast were not built to contend with these extreme temperatures. There's an estimate that nationally, we're going to have to spend $40 billion just to keep up with the demand for cooling in our schools. And teachers, rightly, are now actually starting to bargain on things like the temperature in their classrooms. You're seeing a post here from the Boston Teachers Union showing it, 88 degrees in the classroom. This has real impacts on students' ability to learn and their health. Next slide. The other reason that heat pumps are really an important piece is that they can help us substantially reduce our contribution to building emissions. So on the left, you're seeing a chart that was in the decarbonization roadmap showing the square footage of schools. Unfortunately, Logan, you can go to the next slide. They made a little boo-boo in the square footage there. Schools are actually a top 5 building type when we look at all our square footage of commercial buildings that we need to decarbonize by 2050. And they're top of the line in terms of our public building types. So they are a really important sector in which to do this work. Next slide. So now is really the moment to take action. Why is that? You've already gotten kind of the spoiler alert there, right? These new federal funds that are now available for schools. So on the left-hand side, Inflation Reduction Act provides a new, basically 30 to 50% off coupon, you can think of it as, for, in particular, the most efficient of the heat pumps, the ground source heat pump. This funding, like many parts of the investment tax credit in the Inflation Reduction Act, is available for 10 years. So schools have a really long runway to think about how to do their long-term facilities planning to be able to move in this direction. It's non-competitive. There's no application in the sense that it needs to get, you need to kind of justify your expense. This is about documenting the work that you've done. And it's paid for the first time as a cash payment to non-taxable entities like schools. There is no funding cap on this opportunity, so they're not going to kind of run out of money. The typical value for this incentive will be somewhere between $2 to $6 million, just to give you some sense of how much this is really going to be worth to schools as they seek to move in this direction. Now, schools in Massachusetts can pair that with a newly enriched, really valuable incentive from MassSave. They now are offering $4,500 per ton. This is like based on the size, basically, of the HVAC system for schools, both in new construction and, importantly, in retrofits. Similarly, this is non-competitive. So the typical value of this incentive will be between $500K and $2 million for a school. Next slide. So to wrap this all together in a project that I know well, that's going on here in Massachusetts right now, we have some price points for a new school where we're hoping to combine a ground source heat pump, a solar array that'll provide the clean energy for this heat pump. And right now, the price points for those two really important, really valuable pieces of technology is $13.7 million. Just to give you a sense of, again, how these incentives will reduce that upfront cost, that MassSave incentive is going to take $1.6 million off the sticker price. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to take somewhere between 30 and 50% off the sticker price, turning the new cost upfront to this district of somewhere between 5.2 million and 8 million. That is just a whirlwind change from where things were before the Inflation Reduction Act was passed, before Mass Save made these incentives even more valuable. So in talking with engineers across the country, post-Inflation Reduction Act, what I'm hearing is that as they are bidding out new work, they're finding that ground source heat pumps, the thing that used to be the most expensive, is now coming in as the least cost option for many of their clients. So this is just a huge change, and something that Massachusetts schools can all organize to take advantage of, in the coming years. Next slide. Really, there are six, just to highlight, there are 6 benefits and we've touched on some of them, of why this is so valuable, moving from a pre-IRA world where the vast majority of our schools are dependent on gas and oil, adapting these new cooling needs, enhancing efficiency, improving air quality. There's also health and safety concerns in getting this combustible fuel out of our schools. When paired with solar and energy storage, as they're going to do in Acton Boxborough, we can build the resilience of our school buildings. And of course, by removing the combustion of these fossil fuels, we are helping schools participate and be part of mitigating impacts on climate change and achieving our Massachusetts goals of achieving net zero. Next slide. Thank you so much. You'll hear from me again later on in the presentation.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Are you introducing me, or?
Yes, I'm trying to get the tech. All right. We can all see each other again. Sarah, thank you so much for your presentation, for sharing these game-changing new incentives, particularly, and for setting the stage for us. So next, we will hear from Pip Lewis with a Boston school case study. Pip is a principal at HMFH Architects and AIA and LEED AP certified. HMFH Architects is a Cambridge-based woman-owned architecture firm specializing in the design of innovative, sustainable learning environments. Pip has over 40 years of experience in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, and has led the design of numerous successful school projects across Massachusetts. Most recently, he has been the project director for the new all-electric, carbon-neutral Josiah Quincy Upper School in Boston's Chinatown neighborhood. Pip, thank you so much for being here. I will let you take it from here and tell us all about the Quincy Upper School.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. And you can go on to the next slide. So thank you for having me here to talk about this, the Josiah Quincy Upper School, which I hopefully will offer some lessons in electrifying schools while providing a high quality indoor environment for the students. The Josiah Quincy Upper School is unusual because it's very urban. It's being constructed in Boston's extremely dense Chinatown area. And next, it's a full service middle high school for 650 students, but it's being built on less than an acre of land. So it's a very rare, very vertical school, and has none of the usual outdoor play space that you might usually expect to find in a school. Next. A Tufts University study recently found that the area that's being built in has the most polluted air in Massachusetts due to being located directly adjacent to the Mass Pike and so close to the massive I-93 interchange and also railroad tracks. Next. It also was being designed when the then Mayor Walsh issued a zero carbon executive order asking that new municipal buildings be built to be electrically heated and cooled. So that became our goal for the project. And as you see here, we also created a very large outdoor educational space on the roof area of the Quincy Upper School, where students will find activities such as outdoor classrooms, student gardens, gathering spaces, giving students an opportunity to get some fresh air way up high, where the tough study says the air will actually be cleaner than it is at grade. Next. The study also recommended that buildings might mitigate poor air quality by following a few steps, and we have incorporated them into the design of the building. First of all of the school's fresh air is drawn from up as high as possible and facing away from the pollutant source, which in this case is the turnpike. The classroom air, for instance, will come from rooftop units located 130 feet above the street. We also upgraded the MERV 13 and 14, MERV 13 filters to MERV 14 filters in order to decrease the amount of particulates that's in the air that people will breathe inside the school. And then one final step that we took was to use the displacement ventilation system within the rooms of the school, but I'll get to explaining that in a moment. Next, you can go to the next slide. First, I wanted to look at how we, some of the process of choosing the system using a life cycle cost analysis and other methods. And this was actually a complex process, which is full of choices, and we found also full of some compromises, which you'll hear about. The first cluster of information there goes to predicting the energy that a building will consume, resulting in a simulation for that building or an energy model. The second cluster is establishing what the costs of that system will be, including first the first construction costs, maintenance costs over time, and the useful equipment life replacement costs, all resulting in a life cycle analysis, life cycle cost analysis. Go to the next slide. Yeah. And we looked at several options that all really focus on all electric choices. And the life cycle cost analysis really led us to looking at the top two options there, 1 and 2, which are actually both very similar displacement ventilation options, and are kind of illustrated, if you can see in the upper, that little model of a room there on the upper portion of the slide. The only difference between the two systems is, I'll get to later on, it involves boilers. But they both use water source heat pumps located on the roof to condition the air very effectively, and radiant panels within the rooms to temper the spaces. You can go to the next slide. And we also took a great effort to develop a very tight building, very efficient building with a low EUI. EUI is simply a measure that can be used to estimate the amount of energy per square foot per year that a building will use. We came at Quincy Upper, we're at 24. That compares favorably with the other schools that we show in green there that we have done. And it's interesting to see that the average, the national average for K-12 schools is 75, which is 3 times as much energy being expended per square foot than we're expecting the new Quincy Upper School to use. Next. And now to sort of explain displacement ventilation and contrast it with the traditional mixed air method that we're all used to seeing. In mixed air systems, warm or chilled air, depending on the season, is projected into the room at a relatively high speed to mix with other air to reach the desired temperature. In displacement, however, large quantities of air are allowed to flow out low across the room at a slow speed, displacing the existing warm air there. The occupants themselves in the room heat the air slowly, and it will rise vertically to the ceiling where it's exhausted. This vertical motion limits the spread of dust and allergens around the room. And in addition to providing a very good and very quiet indoor air quality environment. But next slide. We did run into some stumbling blocks, or a stumbling block. The water source heat pumps that we were trying to use could not extract enough heat on the coldest winter days to sufficiently heat the school. And so we needed to supplement with supplemental boilers, which are located on the top of the building, that long gray box on the right-hand side. And these either needed to be powered by electricity or gas-fired. Next. So our life cycle cost analysis showed us, unfortunately, that the power for these electric boilers, which is system 1 in the chart there, would cost significantly more over a 20-year period than the gas-fired boilers, which is system 1A. And across the bottom of the page there, you see the savings. Those numbers are the savings that are predicted over a 20-year period compared to a baseline. And that really doesn't show good results for an all electric system. But go to the next slide, please. Thank you. There are ways of mitigating this cost difference. We at Quincy Upper plan to use a photovoltaic array to offset the costs of the electricity. We ran into some hurdles there, but we'll talk about it in just a bit. But one might also use air source heat pumps on the roof that would eliminate, we understand entirely, the need for the supplemental boilers. However, these are very large and would take up more space than we wanted to use, which we wanted to prioritize for that rooftop educational space that you saw. You could also use a geothermal system or ground source heat pump system that Sarah talked about. That would also eliminate the need for these supplemental boilers. But in Quincy Upper's case, we had such a tight urban site that we really didn't have any open land to use for the drilling of the well fields. Next. And as I said, our intention at Quincy Upper was to use a photovoltaic system. But even this system needed to be very small because our rooftop is very small. And it had to stay off of the area that was going to be occupied by students. And so it had to be built on structure over the mechanical units that are on the roof. So it was also expensive to provide that structure. And as we did an analysis of the energy that the system would generate versus the cost of the system over time, we were finding a savings, but the savings wasn't enough to completely mitigate the high cost of electrical for the boilers. And so eventually, as we wrestled with the budget, we had to value engineer out that system. Now, I really don't think that most school projects will have the same problems finding the perfect system as the Quincy Upper School did, because you'll have plenty of rooftop area, plenty of site area, and you'll find one or more practical and very economical ways of providing an all electric facility. Happily, Quincy Upper chose to adhere to the city's commitment to a zero carbon all electric facility and stayed with the electric boilers despite our electric utility costs. Next. And so the construction of Boston's new all electric school is already towering over the Mass Pike as we speak, and opening for classes in 2024, which, as you can see, this future occupant certainly appears to find the concept of this electrifying. Thank you.
Pip, thank you for sharing that gorgeous school with us. Next, we're going to hear from Talia Fox on Arlington's Air Quality and Electrification Master Plan. Talia is the Sustainability Manager for the town of Arlington. In this role, she is leading implementation of the town's Net Zero Action Plan, Green Communities Program, Arlington Community Electricity Program, and the Electrify Arlington campaign, among other projects targeting greenhouse gas reduction. Talia has expertise in community-driven sustainability and resilience planning, facilitation, and equitable community engagement, and has led several climate action planning processes in the greater Boston region. Talia holds a master's in city planning from MIT. Talia, thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cora. All right, so I'm Talia. I'm the sustainability manager for the town of Arlington, and I'm excited to be sharing a little bit about, at a high level, our air quality and electrification master plan for the town. You can go to the next slide, please. And the next slide. I'll just mention that I was not here for the beginning part of this process, as I only came on board earlier in the year. So like many other municipalities, Arlington has a net zero action plan with a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We have priority areas in that plan that focus on net zero buildings, zero emissions mobility, and clean energy. And one specific priority action we have in there focuses on town buildings, specifically reducing energy use from those buildings, maximizing renewable energy technologies, and making new buildings, and specifically major renovations fossil fuel free. You can go to the next slide. So like other municipalities, also municipal buildings are not a huge portion of our total community-wide emissions. Nevertheless, it is important that as a municipality, we're focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our buildings because we have a degree of control over those buildings, unlike other buildings in town. And it's important to be leading by example in this space right now. Next slide, please. So the goal of our master planning effort here was to understand the potential to reduce energy use and fossil fuel use in existing buildings. So we're looking here in, sort of in an innovative way, I think, at retrofits versus new construction. And we wanted to improve air quality, specifically in our schools. And we focused on schools because they represent about 3/4 of the total square footage that the town owns, and 66%, nearly 2/3 of our building energy use in town, of the municipal building energy use. Next slide, please. And we decided to focus on 6 out of our 11 total schools in town here. And that was largely due to the age of the school. The 5 schools that we did not choose, which are not listed here, are either relatively new or being rebuilt. So Arlington High School is actually a new all-electric building that is underway right now. And so the other schools that we focused on are listed here. Next slide. We had some high-level goals for this study. So here are some of the deliverables that are listed in our RFP, which I know we'll be sharing after this event. But first, we wanted to understand what our baseline was, what existing HVAC equipment and systems did we have in place, electrical service to the building, domestic hot water, and the like. And we wanted to identify alternatives. How could we convert our fossil fuel-based heating systems to all electric? We wanted to make sure we could maintain healthy facilities and acceptable, if not superior, indoor air quality, and then make sure that our classrooms and educational spaces were comfortable for learning and teaching. Other deliverables for our RFP included understanding what solar capacity might be needed to offset energy use on site. So we looked at, or our consultant is looking at, rooftop solar photovoltaics and solar hot water, as well as feasibility of battery storage. And then finally, it's important for us to understand the timeline for these projects, for these 6 schools and their renovations, and what they're going to cost. So that's a big part of this report. A big focus, as I mentioned, was air quality. It's in the title of the master plan. Like in many places, there is an increased concern around air quality following the pandemic. Arlington invested in a lot of filtration equipment for our schools. And we know here, I think if anybody who's here knows that electrification supports indoor air quality, we want to be reducing on-site combustion and improving ventilation to support that comfort and better learning and working environment. So the two viable electrification options that we looked at, which I'll talk about later, have dedicated ventilation air systems to deliver filtered fresh air to all spaces. Here's a high-level timeline of our project. Our net zero action plan was adopted, just for reference, in early 2021. We released an RFP for this project in the summer of 2021, and then contracted with a consultant, CMTA, in the fall of 2021. And they got started late in 2021 into early 2022 with that initial baseline assessment of the building systems, continuing with an alternatives analysis for the different electrification options. And we are in phase 3 right now. So I will not be able to share specifics from our budget, but that is underway. So our consultants looked at 4 alternatives for our HVAC systems in the 6 schools. I will say 2 of these are largely for reference. The first one here is an in-kind replacement where we're basically assuming that we're going to replace all of the existing equipment with new equipment when it breaks. So that's keeping natural gas in a lot of cases, and also in other cases not even including AC, because several of our buildings, being old buildings, do not have AC. The second option here is, I would say, like a standard but inefficient electrification option. So it achieves the goal of electrification, but doesn't do it in the most efficient way possible. It's an interesting comparison point simply because it does assume a certain degree of swap out of existing systems, but it's extremely inefficient, as we know, inefficient as we know electric resistance is, but an interesting comparison point. The 2 more important options here are the variable refrigerant flow, which is an air source heat pump system, and then the ground source heat pump system that we looked at for all 6 schools. And those are the 2 more viable electrification options. You can see here on the right, as part of this report, we have proposed geothermal well field designs for all of the schools. So this is one for the Addison Middle School, conveniently has some fields adjacent to the building where we can be drilling. And all of the proposed designs for HVAC use existing ductwork where possible to try to reduce costs. Some additional components, some of these things Pip had mentioned. So we looked at a few different things in terms of life cycle cost analysis. It included upfront costs, but also operational costs, maintenance, replacement costs, and solar PV costs to really take into account what it's going to mean to replace these over the lifetime of the systems. We have some phasing recommendations that relate to in what order and how long is it going to take to electrify these buildings. And those are based on the building age, the greenhouse gas footprint of the different buildings, and the costs. Just considerations for the town to keep in mind as we're thinking about, how we're going to sequence this. And then all of them have solar designs to utilize available rooftop space and an additional canopy as needed for net zero energy on site. I think we've talked a lot about these incentives already. So the thing I'll mention here is that the IRA and direct pay option for ground source heat pumps is a real game changer for these projects. For all of the schools, the incentives make it such that the ground source heat pumps cost less than the VRF system. And that's exciting because the ground source heat pump systems are more efficient operationally speaking. So that's huge. Assuming we can make those ground source systems work, it will sort of depend on the configuration. That will be big here. So at a high level, some takeaways here. Every system has its pros and cons, and I think the town's going to have to really think about some of these things, ranging from aesthetics to operational efficiency. I think every site is going to have its unique configuration and considerations there. My biggest takeaway from this whole process has just been the amount of time it's going to take. When we're looking at the time frame that the consultant provided for sequencing just 6 of our school buildings, we're looking out to 2035, I'd say, on a, with a conservative estimate. I think that's ambitious. And that's just 6 of our buildings, right? So if we're thinking about a 2050 timeframe for all of this, we really need to start planning ahead, not just in Arlington, but I'd say all across the state. And then it was interesting that we did this as a 6-school plan because of the fact that we know technology is changing, costs are shifting. And so by the time we get to that 6th school, we'll see what everything looks like. And so we're thinking going forward that maybe it makes more sense to do this on a school by school basis so that the planning is a little closer to when we might actually implement. Here's some lessons learned on the procurement side from my predecessor who initiated this process. I think it is sort of cutting edge to be looking at retrofitting existing buildings for all electric, and finding firms with experience doing that was a little tricky. So we got fewer proposals than we thought, and not all met the minimum qualifications. And then we had some scoping challenges where we basically had to reduce the scope to fit our budget. So just a friendly reminder to state your budgets up front in your RFPs. Finally, we're looking at next steps here in Arlington. So just doing some internal reviews of a draft report, and then thinking about next steps for us for these buildings. What's our time frame and what's the feasibility of actually implementing a lot of these recommendations? I'll be keeping an eye on federal and state grants, and putting in capital requests for similar studies of the rest of the buildings in our portfolio. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
So Talia, thank you so much for sharing your work in Arlington and for leading this critical planning process to retrofit your existing schools. Now, Sarah is going to close out today's event by sharing some resources and action steps before we move on to our Q&A. We have a lot of great questions in the chat, and we're going to try and get to as many as we can.
Great, thank you. Logan, you can move on to the next slide. So a few resources and some of the questions in the chat will hopefully be answered by this paper, but I won't make you wait for some of them. So we have a new paper coming out early next year that is really aiming to help school leaders, so not a technical audience, but people like superintendents, school committee members, see the HVAC choices and see how they are connected to the student health and learning that they hold paramount. This is not going to get into technical details. This is really high-level strategic thinking about these HVAC choices, and does, I will say, make the case for moving to the all-electric high-performance systems that both Pip and Talia talked about today. We'll put a link in the chat to sign up for that report, but we're very excited about this filling a gap in what we see available to school leaders right now on a topic that can get really confusing and really technical very fast in an unhelpful way. So look forward to that. The next thing I'll turn you to is, or offer to you, is the section of our website that we call our K-12 Climate Solutions Center. It has a bunch of resources from all around the country, examples of schools, doing various parts of this work, much bigger than HVAC, but this whole constellation of exciting climate action. We have Talia's RFP up there. We've up there posted for folks because that's a great artifact. A plan from Salt Lake City that was really led by students, other resolutions from schools across the country that are passing resolutions, for example, in Portland to get fossil fuels out of their existing buildings. So a lot of great resources here, and those will continue to grow as more of that material becomes available. Next. And then, lastly, as a point of kind of competitive, get our competitive juices flowing, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that just a few days ago, late October, New York City really put themselves in a leadership position when it comes to retrofitting existing buildings and removing fossil fuels. The mayor announced a $4 billion plan to electrify 800 schools in New York City. This is will be the single most impactful thing that the city will do to meet its own compliance with its goals to reduce building emissions. So reminding me, and I should remind all of us, that schools are vital to achieving our climate goals. And importantly, they're prioritizing doing this retrofit work in the schools that right now are burning the dirtiest of fuels, the number 4 heating oil, and in the communities that are most burdened by air pollution. The type of communities that Pip was talking about, sitting right next to a highway. So for me, and by the way, they've connected it to the learning agenda and thinking about how this can help develop a green workforce in New York State. So to me, this is really a model, and I certainly hope that it gets our competitive juices flowing with new leadership here in the state, and that we move in this direction of really focusing on retrofits serving the most vulnerable. Next slide. All right, so what can you do today when you leave this event? We have prepared a quick little one-pager that will help you engage leaders in your district around this new opportunity to retrofit, make a plan to retrofit and get fossil fuels out of our schools and switch to this new technology. And again, it's really focused on heat pumps, given the new incentives from Mass Save and in the case of ground source heat pumps, the Inflation Reduction Act. This is available on our website for you to download. We've even given you a little template email that you can make your own as you engage your district leaders. So wanted to offer that up. And I think now, question time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for those wonderful presentations. So helpful and so much great content in there. I see that there have been questions coming in from the chat. So I think what I'll do, I think we'll have time maybe to get to 3 or 4 questions. So I've been trying to pay attention to the ones that might be most suited for everyone. And I'm going to start with a question that was submitted by Martha from Melrose, asking about what section of the IRS code under IRA offers the heat pump incentive, and have the regulations been promulgated yet, or will they be introduced through a different mechanism?
I'm happy to take that one. Cora, I don't know if you want to drop what I wrote there into the chat, but I'll just really say, so it's the investment tax credit, which has been around for a while. It's the same vehicle that we've used to grow our solar industry to great heights in this country. What they did with the Inflation Reduction Act was they expanded the technologies that it is available for. So there's geothermal is among those new technologies. And they've combined it, importantly, with a new provision called direct pay, which makes this tax credit right now available as a cash payment to non-taxable entities like schools. So you really have to see these two things and put them together. And I apologize, I should put the section there that's the direct pay section, because that's a whole different section. So you got to kind of be expert at reading this stuff and see how these two pieces fit together. But this is an existing playbook that's basically been improved on, V2.0, I guess you could say. And sorry,
Excellent.
And the timing on the promulgation. So what's available right now is the 30%. As you noted in my presentation, it was 30 to 50%. So there's an additional 10% if you use American-made parts, particularly things like steel. I think supply chains will still determine whether that is possible and accessible in the short term. I was talking to some solar installers yesterday, and they said, for ground mounts, that's going to be really easy to meet the test for domestic content there. For roof mounts, it's going to be a little harder because we don't have American-made panels. We do have American-made racking. So there's an additional 10% that'll come available January 1. So this is projects put into service after January 1. And then another 10% will be available for projects that are located in what's called an energy community. This is a new concept that was introduced by the Inflation Reduction Act. And we have yet to see formal US government, maps that designate, you are an energy community, you are an energy community. There are maps out there of folks already opining, kind of guessing and reading the tea leaves, but those pieces will become available. And we expect guidance out from the IRS January, February of 2023. I know there are RFIs out that folks are responding to help guide the development of those regulations, and we should see those early in the new year.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. And Pip and Talia, is there anything you want to add on to that before we go to the next question? All good. Okay, so I'll pass. Perfect. So this one will actually be might be a little bit more geared to your presentation, but someone asked, are there any studies that you can point me to about the health effects of on-site fossil fuel combustion, and to kind of arm folks with, in the discussion? And I would just add to that, and this is, Talia and Pip, are there any particular things that you all think about and you keep in mind, with regards to the health impacts as you're looking at planning and developing these new all-electric buildings?
Well, I can start at least. I'm not really aware of a study on a building by building basis that talks about health effects of combustion on a building. If you're if you are installing gas-fired equipment in a building, it's going to be pretty efficient and try to get rid of the pollutants up high as much as possible. So I don't know if there's a direct issue that way, but what we were wrestling with at for the Quincy Upper School, and what I think is maybe the bigger impact, is the impact of the environmental air in an area. And that certainly, I would have to find the references to the study and post them. But the work that Tufts University did certainly indicates the health effects, asthma, et cetera, on the people who live in that area, and can have a pretty major effect.
Absolutely. Talia, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. So I guess some people here might be familiar with all of the studies that have come out in terms of cooking using gas in homes. I think that is a good reference point just for the harms of combustion in a space. I would say here in town, we have a gas leaks task force that's working hard on repairs to, or I guess advocating for repairs to gas infrastructure. And I think we don't always place as much in general and place as much import on the effects of those leaks, both for the environment and for humans around them. I think in Arlington, we've also been able to demonstrate that those gas leaks are killing trees. So I think there's something to be said, not just for the combustion in the building, but also for the infrastructure that's going up to the building.
And
Absolutely.
if Elliot suggests something else, because there has been a lot of discussion recently about the effects of cooking with gas. So our Quincy school also, we haven't talked about the food service equipment yet, but it's an all-electric kitchen and an all-electric food tech classroom area. So those areas have made the changeover also in order to deal with those impacts.
That is the same for our study as well.
That's excellent. And I know this was going on in the chat, but Sarah, I know you are an abundance of information around studies. So are there any other studies you'd like to point folks to?
Well, hopefully the jumble that Cora put in there for us will work. But yeah, that's exactly the information that's going to be in our forthcoming paper in January. I did just quickly run to that section and pull the main pieces of literature that we cite in that report, so you wouldn't have to wait, because I'm not about making anybody wait. And I think I totally agree with Talia that all the information coming about gas stoves is really a good indicator. When we did research for this report, there were not a lot of studies, any studies actually, that we could point to that really look at the HVAC system specifically. The notion, some people will tell you, well, it's vented. And the idea is you don't have to worry about it. And from my perspective, given that our boilers and our HVAC systems in schools are decades old and desperately in need of repair, I have zero confidence that venting is happening 100% and that there's not leakage into our schools. The other piece I threw in the chat was a report that we did earlier with Heat, identifying from their gas leaks mapping statewide the extent to which their gas leaks that they identified are co-located with school properties. So these are not leaks inside the building, but these are leaks at the school property, basically in the distribution network. And so, again, present risks to students and those schools. And the highlight from that was in 1 year alone, there were 91 school properties where there were gas leaks at the school property in that distribution infrastructure.
Wow. That's really helpful, Sarah. Thank you so much. I want to I see that there are two comments around incentives, so I want to kind of bunch them together, and then I want to talk a little bit about the life cycle analysis that you all have been working, or that you have completed and done in these instances. But before I do, some folks asked about when the GSHP incentive will become available, and similarly, someone asked around what folks know about how schools and municipalities can benefit from the energy efficiency commercial buildings deduction under section 179D. So I assume I'll pass this over to you, Sarah, first, to see if you have a response to either of those questions.
Yeah, so quickly, again, the 30% base is available now. The bonus credits, the 210%, will be available come January 2023. So any projects put into service after January 1, we won't know exactly, we don't have the guidance about exactly how it's going to all come together in terms of the process, but any projects put into service after January 1 will get access to those bonus credits. And then, yes, the 179D is also available and newly enriched, so up to $5 a square foot now if you hit a 50% reduction in energy. That needs to be taken, you need to work with a designer on that because they are the ones to actually take the deduction, and then they can theoretically pass and share some of the wealth. But folks like Pip will probably know more about how that's managed.
Yeah, that really states it well, because the school districts are not paying taxes. They can sign over their tax benefits under 179D to the designers, and we share it between us and our engineers who are responsible for the design. And in some cases, it's really not the intent that it's there's a payback for it, but there have been communities where we have shared some of the tax deduction benefit with the town in terms of a donation. I don't think there's really a way that you're supposed to just give the money directly back, but we have provided some proportion of it as a charitable donation to some portion of the school or the community.
Excellent. Yeah, that's helpful, Pip. Thanks for adding on. I have one final question, and selfishly, this is one that I have for you, Pip, and you, Talia. Both of you mentioned life cycle analysis and that being kind of a critical piece of the puzzle as you're moving forward. And I'm just curious to what extent you all are incorporating embodied carbon into that discussion, the carbon in the walls, if you are, and if you've run into any challenges along the way as you're doing that.
And I can answer quickly that we are not specifically yet with the life cycle analyses that we've done to date, but we're working at it. We're working with ourselves and our engineers to get to that point where embodied carbon, because that's such an important part of the equation. So the life cycle cost analyses that I talked about that we did for Quincy Upper didn't include that at all. But hopefully, as we go forward, we'll begin incorporating that information into our life cycle cost analysis.
I have a similar answer, which is that no, it is unfortunately not included in this study, but I hope that we will be able to consider that going forward. It was simply not in the scope.
Absolutely. Sarah, anything you want to add on to that question? Okay. I think, I think that makes sense. Embodied carbon is really becoming very much so, coming onto the scene, and people are recognizing it more and more as the elephant in the room, and something that absolutely needs to be addressed. So we have about 2 more minutes remaining. So I want to just conclude with 2 quick things. The first is I want to make sure that everyone is aware that we have, what we're talking about today, and the opportunities that are being discussed are really changing the game. But there's no question that we need to continue to move forward. We need to continue to make sure that communities like Arlington, like others who are interested, are continuing to get the resources they need to build out these plans. And so one proposal that MCAN has been working on in partnership with Undaunted K through 12, and 145 other organizations is something called a zero carbon renovation fund. And this is a request to get $300 million from the remaining ARPA funds to be set aside specifically for the creation of a fund that would enable and kind of specifically incentivize and fund deep energy retrofits in places like affordable housing, schools, other municipal buildings, and environmental justice communities. So Sarah just put that in the chat, but I'd be remiss if I didn't quickly mention that. The second thing that I wanted to just mention, and really as a concluding thought, I just want to thank Pip, you so much, and Talia and Sarah for your incredible expertise and your incredible work with the Quincy School and in Arlington. We're so grateful for everything that's happening on the ground, and so excited to continue to see it move forward. And I also want to thank everyone for joining our call today and for staying till the end. And I hope this was useful. We will, as I mentioned, follow up with all of the resources that we discussed today. And we'll continue working together to ensure that our schools, the place where our children are spending a whole lot of time, are healthy, safe climate protectors. So thank you all so much for joining. We're so grateful for all your work and all your leadership on this issue.
Well, thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.